But now I don't see those cobbles and curbs. I don't hear the blues anymore.
Rough Trade is giving away a third of the first 3 months of the Rough Trade Club plus new music membership exclusively to 101 Part-Time Jobs listeners. Become a member of Rough Trade Club New Music and you'll receive the Rough Trade Album of the Month straight to your door every month on exclusive vinyl pressing with exclusive bonus material. Club members have received exclusive pressings of albums from Sufjan Stevens, Sprint, The Last Dinner Party, Julie Byrne, and Over Mono, just to name a few, this past year alone. Sign up using the promo code CLUB101POD and you'll get the Rough Trade Album of the Month, English Teacher's excellent debut album, This Could Be Texas, on exclusive Galaxy Gold for a third of the usual price. Here's English Teacher on a recent episode of 101.
How many opportunities do you get to write a debut album and have all of this, sport behind us? I don't know, I really like the idea of holding the bar as being like classic songs.
You only get one shot at a debut.
Don't want the album of the month but still want all the benefits? Sign up to the standard tier using Club 101 Pod and you'll still get the first month free. You'll also get free shipping on all orders, 10% off the bar and on secondhand vinyl in-store, and exclusive access to sold-out Rough Trade events. So don't hang around. Go to roughtrade.com/club and sign up with the code CLUB101POD. That's CLUB101POD and claim money off the album of the month, English Teachers This Could Be Texas, today. This offer's available to UK residents only. Do you play in bands? I did for the longest time. And I wish that I knew that DistroKid was a thing. I don't even think it existed back then. DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists keep 100% of your royalties and earnings. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all the major streaming services. When you get DistroKid, you can see a DistroKid bank and withdraw your earnings. You get notified when you've earned royalties and you can withdraw via the app. And you can even check your streaming stats on Spotify and Apple. Get 30% off your first year on DistroKid by going to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod. 30% off for your first year. That's not bad. We know it's a tough world out there. Why don't you make it easier for yourself? And to get 30% off that free year as an artist, where you get 100% of your royalties and earnings, go to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod. All right, stay with me. I'll be right back after this.
The Vietnam War, it's over. Your job has just begun.
A new HBO original limited series.
Welcome to the world of spycraft. Strap in.
From executive producers Park Chan-wook and Robert Downey Jr.
What are you concealing?
Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Viet Thanh Nguyen.
What if I told you that I was a communist spy?
How did you become this?
The Sympathizer, streaming April 14th on Max. Subscription required.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hey, you're listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs with me, Giles Bidder, where I speak to bands and artists who just love writing, playing music more than anything else in life, and how they've prioritized it to make somewhat of a life out of it, really. I think I speak to people who work lots of part-time jobs, as well as people who have been playing music as their main thing. And that's the case with today's guest, Buck Meek from Big Thief, the band that we know and have so many feelings for. They're an enduring band. The message that they spread is one of compassion, it's one of understanding and of love. And in this world, we need that. And I think that's why so many of us have become so attached to Big Thief and their records, including the 7-inch that just came out last week. Vampire Empire and Born for Loving You, both lovely songs, and they give that energy that we've learned to expect in a way from Big Thief. Our expectations are high. That's because they've given us so much good stuff. So look, thanks so much for clicking on this and tuning in. Buck Meek tells us some stories from way back when, leading up until now, and his solo album, Haunted Mountain. Thank you so much for listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs. If you like this show, please leave a review or a rating. That helps me massively. You can subscribe as well so you get notified as and when episodes come out. And I've just announced a live show at the Bush Hall in London with Bob Villan. That's on Tuesday, the 12th of December. And tickets are on sale for that now at 101parttimejobs.com. All right, before we get into this chat, I'm here with Rebecca from Eka, brand ambassador for Ampolo, which is a great free app for musicians. Rebecca, could you tell us a bit about Ampolo and who's using it and why and when?
So I've been using Ampolo for a few months now. You can upload any song. So I've been playing around with some Eka bits, or I'm a saxophonist, so I play a lot of Charlie Parker and things like that, so anything goes really, and it demixes it within under a minute, so I can take out that part. So especially for jazz use case, if I'm wanting to improv, myself, I'm not then stuck with Charlie's solo. Said no one ever, but it means that I can experiment with my own, which is really cool. And alongside that, I'm kind of filming myself, seeing what I look like. So it's great, and you're kind of recording that and then sharing it. It's a little bit of that kind of digital, practice room board. We're looking for a drummer, we're looking for a guitarist, with alongside all these super cool tools. And I'm using it for all the different instruments I play. And
it's out now, Ampolo. It's out there to be had. No downsides.
No downsides, yeah. Go download it and I'll see you in there.
All right, you're listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs. Here's Buck Meek from Big Thief. 101 Part-Time Jobs.
There are so many jobs that go into being a musician, and I worked so many jobs before I was able to make a living with music, and I think that did help build a work ethic and kind of like the ability to multitask and all that. Because I don't know, I think I was working since I was like 15, maybe up until pretty recently, honestly, working part-time jobs in between tours and gigs just to pay the rent. And I think that definitely taught me how to work.
It's a good thing to be pushed into, whether it's by family or whether you take it into your own hands at 15 and think, I'm going to print out my resume, my CV, and go around town and hand it to everyone and anyone, and with a smile, and hope that I get something.
For sure, and it teaches you how to, be a good person in society. You can't. Yeah, you have to contribute to keep your job, and that's really important in music too, I think. I don't know, in my experience being a musician, like more important than anything, more important than my chops or my songs, my sound, whatever, is just trying to be a good person and building friendships and building a community. That's the thing that's really given me the most opportunities and creative opportunities.
That's really interesting. I think that's at different times when you're playing music or you get involved in the music industry, you'll start hearing that word network. To me, it's always felt like the people that I've quote unquote networked with and among, those are people that I've gravitated towards, or they've gravitated towards me. And we ultimately, the ideal scenario is that you're with people and you make each other feel good and you enjoy the same thing and you're plugging into that same magic.
Definitely.
Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah, for me, I mean, that term network is scary because it feels like you're supposed to go out and like go to the hot club and meet all the hot players and all the hot managers and all this stuff and kind of shoot for this like echelon of whatever. But I don't know, in my experience, just connecting with the people in your immediate community who you resonate with musically or just as friends, and just playing house shows together, playing whatever show you can get, and jamming and just really making music with your friends like you did in high school. Like I think that's been the most productive approach for me and the people in my community.
When you think about those meetings, those fun nights, those house shows, those times when you're laughing and the music, it just feels, you feel buoyed by it all. What are your earliest memories of those kinds of situations?
Oh, way back really in high school, I was really lucky I grew up in a little town in Texas called Wimberley, and there was a pretty awesome music community there. A lot of older musicians from the Austin scene, and a lot of players from the Bob Wills band, and a lot of old blues players and outlaw songwriters. And all these old players kind of like took kids under their wings, as proteges, and kind of like supported the youth there in Wimberley. And so I was lucky to have a handful of teachers, like this dude Slim Ritchie, who was a great old jazz guitar player, and Brandon Gist, blues guitar player from Memphis, and Django Porter, who was a manouche jazz player. And those were, some of my teachers, and they gave me my first gigs and like some of my buds, and we even started bands with these players. And so those are my first experiences of that feeling of just playing music with your friends and putting whatever show you can muster together, and, people dancing and just really playing music for parties, really, which is the heart of it all.
Music's got that very special thing of you will be looking up to someone, and you ultimately kind of want to do it how they're doing it. They're taking a path, or maybe it's the music, maybe it's the way they do it, maybe it's the artwork, and then all of a sudden you become friends with them, and you're working, you're playing together. I think music's very unlike a lot of other kind of hobbies in that way.
Totally, yeah. There's this, I love that kind of shared curiosity and humility that you find in like playing music with someone. There's always something to learn, no matter how experienced you are. There's always something to learn from each other, and the spontaneity and this kind of like ephemeral quality to music, and just creating something in the moment that immediately disappears, but that gives people a sense of meaning or joy or whatever, empowers whatever emotion. I don't know. I think that's something really cool about music.
Yeah, and there's always a desire to learn. I want to be 90 years old and wake up thinking, gonna learn something today.
Totally.
When you moved to Brooklyn, was that a move to keep playing music?
Yeah, I had left Texas when I was 17 to go to music school in Boston at the Berklee College of Music, and that was another kind of chapter in my life of, I went to study jazz, and because I grew up playing a lot of like old time ragtime and manouche jazz, and like, again, jazz for parties and dancing, and jazz for like roadhouse bars, and I had so much fun playing jazz as a kid. And then when I went to Berklee to study jazz, I was a little bit disillusioned by the more competitive aspect of the jazz that I found there, and that's when I started writing songs and started playing rock and roll after school, and with my friends. There's a lot of kids who go to Berklee to study jazz and end up writing rock songs or writing songs like for themselves in this kind of existential crisis of like growing up and figuring out who they are musically, and kind of deprogramming whatever influence they had initially. And it's such a beautiful process to see kids go through that. And but nonetheless, I had built this whole community at Berklee of kids who were starting bands and playing house shows, and all around the Boston and Cambridge area. And then a lot of those kids moved to New York City whenever we graduated. And so there was this kind of migration down, just 3 hours down the highway to New York. And so,
Great.
Into the big city. But we were all just little babies. It felt like moving to Gotham, like with just no idea. And we had no idea how the music industry worked, or none of us even knew what a record deal was or what publishing is, or we didn't even know what a manager was. Like, we didn't know anything. We had very few of us had ever made $1 playing music, so, but we had this like degree and all this, intellectual experience and theory, and like all these big ideas and all these new songs, and we all moved to New York kind of at the same time. There's a huge community of kids, and Big Thief came out of that community, but we were really just a very small part of this huge constellation.
It taps into what you're saying just then, and also the communities that you're coming from in Texas, where everyone's a mentor and everyone's a mentoree. I find that there's so much fun, and I love taking music seriously. It's also fun. It's kind of everything, right? And being able to laugh and cry and scream and dance to it, that's just it's a feeling that you follow, right? It's not something that you can write down on paper all the time.
No, it's just a feeling. Just whatever feels good, whatever sparks your curiosity.
That kind of element of DIY house shows, for me, it's a lot about punk, and that's how I understand that kind of world. Did it feel punk to you, or was it always, for lack of, for a broad term, were you in a kind of folk world?
I guess it's however you define punk. I mean, for me, yeah, there was definitely a super DIY aspect to it, a lot of experimentation. I mean, again, like most of the kids I was hanging out with at Berkeley, for instance, had gone there to study jazz or composition or these more like heady forms of music, and then ended up kind of throwing it all out and just trying to write rock and roll and kind of bending the rules of, just plugging their guitars into dirty amps and, but then simultaneously writing inherently with a lot of odd time signatures and complex harmony, but with a drum kit and with like more punk instruments. So a lot of music kind of came out of that synthesis, I guess. But we definitely with the ethos, the punk ethos, as far as like putting shows together and playing in basements, and just everybody having like 10 bands and playing for free, and big potluck dinners and whatever.
Yeah. Do you remember moving to Brooklyn and sort of what were the first places that you lived in like? What did your bedroom look like? How many people were living in the place?
Sure. I was, let's see, the first place I was crashing was, it was like it was a giant old warehouse, and some like Brooklyn hipster slumlord had built like 10 little plywood boxes inside of this warehouse that I was living in, like a caged animal. But I was lucky. There was so many cool venues at the time in Bushwick and in Brooklyn. I'm sure there still are. They're constantly shutting down and changing. But at the time, there was Shea Stadium and a ton of great venues. And so a lot of those kids from Berkeley and so many other kids were just, again, playing. There was just shows every single night, and there was so much experimentation happening, which was so much fun.
Yeah. I went to Suburbia a couple of times.
Oh, nice. I don't even know what that is.
That one?
There's so many venues, and they're always, it's like, constantly eating each other, which...
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you balance the kind of learning and sort of owning your craft and getting your chops up and writing at home, and that kind of social element? Because I think those two things can work so symbiotic. They can work together and become so strong. They can also become a tension there, right? Because if you're going out every night, it's not always healthy. It's kind of to have that. I suppose I'm talking about discipline. Waking up in the morning and think, okay, I'm going to spend an hour writing today.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I've always tried to use the evening as kind of the incentive or the accountability to work, in the day. Just to have a show booked before you even have material is definitely the most inspiring thing for me, because like you're expecting to have an audience, and you better pull it together. There's like a hard deadline, and so I think ever since I was a kid, I would just book shows, probably for the most part, just to kind of force myself to finish things.
What's that quote that a lot of people, like Paul McCartney and John Lennon would have talked about, where writing songs feels a bit like having an antenna and tuning into what's around you, and it's pure, it's uncomplicated. Your songs, especially on Haunted Mountain, that I've been listening to a lot last few weeks, is that it feels like that. It's so pure.
Oh, thank you.
When you signed to Saddle Creek, Cursive and Bright Eyes, Conor Oberst, how people know that label, and did that have a big effect on you working with a label like that and understanding how everything it all works?
Well, actually, Big Thief signed to Saddle Creek for our first record way back, and I mean, to be honest, like I don't think any of us in Big Thief had really been like deep Saddle Creek kids, for whatever reason, and we were so deep in our own community, to be honest. Like we were coming up in Brooklyn, and there was there was 100 bands in our community or something, and I think that was our world. Like, we were so excited to have label support and to have a little, to have a little budget to press vinyl and to make a record. But I think at that time we were fully immersed in this community of bands that most of which never signed a deal, but that were our biggest inspiration and our audience at the time, playing at the Manhattan Inn and playing with bands like Really Big Pinecone, Star Rover, Margaret Glaspie, Landlady, so many bands, Michael. Like, I could go on forever with all those New York bands.
It's funny, as a fan, I'll never know about most of those bands that was your world, that was so deep in that world. And so it's interesting. There's a kind of micro macro thing going on there. Maybe that's the right way or the wrong way to explain it. But it's always interesting how deep those scenes go. And yet, as fans, near or far away, we only get to see a certain amount of it.
Yeah, I know it's a tragedy, but it's also such a it's just the way of life. But I love trying to do whatever research I can to kind of dig into band's history, because, again, like, as a fan, I usually perceive a band based on their first big record or their first label record or whatever. Even being in a band, knowing like the history of like how much went into it leading up to our first record, Masterpiece. I mean, we went through so many iterations of even our own band members getting to that point, and so many, like, there was 2 years where we didn't have a band name, and we were experimenting with different bass players and different drummers and playing so many gigs as a duo and as a trio, and making EPs and putting them out on Bandcamp and under different names and all this stuff. And most people have never heard any of that stuff. And so but having gone through that, I still perceive a lot of my favorite bands as like beginning at this hard moment of their first album. And so I try to break that cycle by looking deeper into their communities. But it's hard to do that research, though.
First of all, it's overwhelming, and that's the kind of what we taught. That's what we were kind of taught reading NME or whatever magazine. Is that there's this entry point, and that's the frame.
Yeah, but I appreciate this podcast because it's so interesting to go back and into not only a band but each individual player's history, and to really understand all of the influences. Because a band like Big Thief or my band, every player has this incredible constellation of all these influences that led them up to the point of our collaboration, and that's a big part of the sound.
And your own kind of individual personalities. I mean, maybe in the same kind of thinking as you hear that first album record, is you think of a band as this sort of tight group that are always together. There's so much joy to be explored when you're looking at players as individuals.
Totally.
And that's something that's always felt so prominent with Big Thief, and you as solo players. Has it always been an important thing for everyone in the band to have their own kind of you can create your own lanes whenever you want to?
Definitely, I think that's a huge part of Big Thief and my solo project as well. We're all working really hard in other projects and on our own music, and I think we really value each other's individual voices and try to make space for those things and there's always friction there. There's inherent friction when you're coming from different directions, but in that friction you find a lot of vitality.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to be brave.
Yeah, exactly. You have to humble yourself a lot. I mean, with Big Thief, for instance, James Grifchinia grew up playing tons of punk rock and a lot of noise music and now he's like mostly making ambient music and electronic music on his own. And Max grew up playing jazz, hardcore jazz on upright bass, and of course Adrienne grew up writing her own songs, and I grew up playing mostly manouche jazz and blues and ragtime and swing and stuff. And then with my band, it's the same deal. Like, everybody comes from these. Austin Vaughn on drums, he got his degree in like classical percussion and jazz, and Matt Davidson grew up playing fiddle in the Blue Ridge or in the Appalachian Mountains, and and Ken Woodward also grew up playing a lot of bluegrass. So everyone comes from these different directions, and we just have to find kind of a meeting point.
Before I forget, if you've got a pen right now, you have to write down the band Caroline with a lowercase c, if you haven't already heard them. They're a great band here, and I think you'll like them.
Nice.
Forgive me for asking this question, Buck, because I'm sure you get asked it a bunch. How do you know when you're writing a Buck Meek song or a Big Thief song?
Well, when Adrian and I first started playing music together, we were playing as a duo, and we were collaborating a lot, writing songs together, and both contributing our original songs and finishing them together. And then at some point in 2014, after touring a lot with a duo, we separated those projects. So Big Thief became her primarily her songwriting project, and then my band became my primary songwriting project. So it's basically like if I start a song from scratch, it's most likely going to my band, and vice versa. Yeah. And then sometimes we help each other finish songs. Sometimes she'll bring a half-finished song to me or an idea, and I'll help her finish it. But generally, the seed is from her, and vice versa.
And it's taken time to work that out, right? Communicating is hard. Even if you have the best relationship you've ever been part of, communication is always going to be one of those things you have to nurture and you have to pay attention to. Quite often it's easy to shy away from communication, right? You're forced to look right at that if you want to do it well, if you want to do it to the best of your ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the hardest and most powerful part of being in a band is developing communication skills and developing healthy communication. It's been a long process for us to develop that healthy communication, the two of us and as a band and with my band. It's a never-ending process, but yes, it took a lot of iterations to get to the point where we are now, as far as songwriting and compartmentalizing those ideas through just a lot of experimentation. There's no like short way around that.
Was it always going to be music for you when you were moving when you were moving up to Boston and then down to Brooklyn? Was it always going to be music? Was there anything else that you had to negotiate that with?
I always knew I wanted to play music since I was maybe 6 years old. I picked up the guitar when I was 5 or 6, and I was dead set on it since the beginning. But I've worked so many jobs in the meantime. I mean, in order to make that. And I also had a lot of curiosity beyond music. I always wanted to be a songwriter, and in high school at least, I believed that in order to be a good songwriter, I needed to have more experience than just writing songs. Just working every kind of job I could find. I worked a lot my father is a glass sculptor, and I worked as his assistant for a long time. He works with broken glass, so I was just hammering glass all day long.
Wow, how does that work? How do you make something out of broken glass?
Well, my father has kind of invented this technique where he can take a hammer to a piece of glass and break it in like 100 different ways, depending on the angle of his hammer, and then he re-sculpts that into these giant sculptures.
Oh, cool!
And check him out. Bill Meek is his name, and
will do.
So that was kind of my first job, and very hard work, just cutting yourself every day on broken glass, and wow. but so like. Yeah, elemental. And then I worked for one of his best friends is this dude, Jim LaPasta, who's a metal sculptor. And so I worked every summer in between music school as Jim LaPasta's assistant, cutting like sheet stainless steel with a plasma cutter and welding it into these big kinetic sculptures. And then I also worked as a pedicabber in Boston and New York City, which was
as a
wild.
What, sorry?
A pedicabber, like a bicycle taxi driver. That was one of my biggest jobs, which was really flexible. As you mentioned earlier, it allowed me to come and go in between tours, and also worked as a bike messenger in New York City for years, which is also kind of flexible work. Bike messenger communities are this kind of underground subculture, right? Yeah, I never got too deep into that community, although I was deep in the pedicab community, which is even weirder. It's like the pedicab communities are like land pirates or something. Pedicab being when you're in like sort of Times Square, when people jump on the back. Yeah, exactly, like a rickshaw kind of thing. Those are some land pirate communities. They're hilarious. Night owls. How so? Just they're just living on they're just, I don't know, you're like the shark of the street, you know? You're kind of you're out there kind of trying to read the movement of the city and trying to understand like where people's vices are moving throughout the night, you know, and trying to basically prey on people's, you know, vices, needing to get from one bar to another, needing to get to a show, needing to get back to their car, etc. But just trying to, you know, kind of slip in between the cracks and go the wrong way up up Fifth Avenue to get to the whatever. Yeah. What are your main memories of that time? Well, honestly, the best one was I went down to Washington, D.C. to pedicab Obama's inauguration, which was really moving.
Wow.
It was his second inauguration, but nonetheless such a celebration. And I worked for almost 24 hours straight. And yeah, that was really inspiring, just to have conversations with so many people who had come from all over the country to see him be inaugurated for the second time, and so much pride and joy around that day. That was my favorite day ever pedicabbing. And bike messaging was a blast too, because in New York City, I love working these jobs in New York City that kind of get you into the underbelly of how the machine of that city, because there's the surface and the tourist layer, but then just literally on a physical level, all of those giant skyscrapers have these massive infrastructures underneath the surface of the city, with these giant like spiral loading docks that an entire like lorry can go down like 10 stories to, and then these huge cargo elevators that a whole lorry can fit on to go up to the top. And like, as a bike messenger, you're in that world constantly, going down into the belly, and there's all this, there's a huge staff down there of people who just live in the dark, and you start to develop relationships with these security guards and these door people and the elevator guys, and then you go up to the 100th floor with a legal document, and you go into this super slick like legal office, and you're covered in snow and grease, and you hand off this legal document, and you see these epic views of the city that you would never see, and and then you're going into hospitals to get a lot of medical samples because it's so much faster to deliver those on bicycle, like blood samples and stuff. And so yeah, I love that aspect of bike messaging, kind of seeing how the city really turns on a daily basis.
You mentioned moving down to Brooklyn was like moving to Gotham. I mean, you painted that picture very well there.
Yeah. And also worked a lot of construction in New York City, and I got to work for this cool company called Build It Green that was like a deconstruction warehouse where they had a team. I was on this deconstruction team where we'd go around and deconstruct building materials, and then they would resell them as like a recycled building material warehouse. And so I got to take apart like these giant lobbies of skyscrapers with huge sheets of marble, and like we took apart this old oak like physics library at Columbia University very carefully, and filled an entire truck with it, and an old water tower, and we got to really like literally take apart the materials of New York City from bygone eras as they were being replaced, and try to recycle them. That was fun.
I feel like New York's one of those places that you have to become part of it. I feel like you can't really go against the grain there. You have to become one. Definitely,
yeah. In every way, yeah.
At what point did it start to take over? When the music take over? Was it sort of when you first got that first tour where you came back with money? Was it the first, bigger fee that you thought, okay, maybe we can make this work. Maybe I can make this work.
Well, I was playing on the streets throughout this whole process. Ever since I was in college, I was going down into the subway to busk and to play mostly covers and some of my like original songs, but playing in the subway in Boston, and also when I moved to New York, playing at the Bedford subway and Times Square, and Central Park and Washington Square Park, and even Adrian and I would go to Washington Square Park and busk. And get kicked out by the park ranger. I think there's some video on YouTube of us playing the song Paul actually there as a duo way before that song was recorded. But nonetheless, like I was pulling scratch together busking for a long time, and then we saved up as much money as we could working these day jobs, also working as a bartender and a line cook and as a music teacher here and there. But nonetheless, we saved up a few $1,000s, and we bought this busted old van, 87 Chevy van. And we booked a tour around the country, and it took us like a year to book the tour because we had no resources and experience booking a tour. So we mostly just reached out to friends that we knew played music in various towns around the country, or friends who maybe had friends who played music, and we booked a bunch of shows as an opener and little house parties and bars around the country. And we quit our jobs and we got in the van and we played every show we could. And that was in tandem with this conversation I'd had with my dad, actually, about like removing your backup plan. My dad's he's been a sculptor since he was 17 and never really worked a day job. And he encouraged me he's like, honestly, if you keep working day jobs to pay your rent forever, you're never going to fully commit to music as your survival. Like you need to remove your backup plan so you only have music, and you're completely broke and you're naked, and you have to you have to survive with your music. And so we did that like in tandem. I mean, we prepared ourselves for that to some degree. We saved up, we got a van, we booked a tour. You know, looking back, it was the most ragtag tour you can possibly imagine. Most of the shows were like there was 3 people there, or you know, playing these really weird gigs, and some beautiful house shows along the way, and a couple of great opening slots. But for the most part, it was like so ragtag. But nonetheless, we felt prepared enough to quit our jobs and to never look back, and just commit to surviving, I guess. That was really the turning point.
Yeah, it's funny how, you know, I've done just 300 of these episodes with all kinds of different folk, people who have been doing it full time for a long time, and people who are definitely not, you know, who are working multiple part-time jobs. And one common theme, one thing that brings it all together in my mind, one of the things is that it's not a clean cut. It's not a one-to-one. It's not it's never going to be a one day to the next thing. There is that crossover period.
Yeah, and even then, like even after that first tour, of course we ran out of money. Like we came back in debt, you know, and so I did have to keep picking up little random jobs, and I just made sure that my jobs were very non-committal. Like Pedicabbing, for instance, allowed me to come and go, and whatever. I would even grab a job and then just quit it a week later once I had saved a couple $100. But I tried to at least have this diamond in my mind that like I was not using these jobs as a backup plan. It was just to literally get me like to the next month of rent, you know. And I mean to the point where we actually moved out of our apartments, and we got to the point where after about a year of touring, we decided, you know, in order to really commit to this, we're just gonna let go of our apartments and basically live in the van, you know, and just tour like 11 months a year, and otherwise crash with friends and maybe sublet a room here and there, but just go all in. And that was a long process. It was a few years of that, not making any money. And
wow.
But I think that's just kind of treating it like a full-time job basically. That's the point at which we started seeing some progress, at least.
Yeah, treat it like a full-time job to make it your full-time job.
Yeah, exactly. Working literally like 8 hours a day at it or more before it was making any money. But the thing about music that I love is that there's so much currency in the exchange of there's so much currency beyond money. Like with music, you can find a place to stay and a meal every night of the week, you know, because everybody in the world needs music, and people around the world are happy to give you a place to sleep and cook you a meal, and in exchange for your music. So I guess we just kind of leaned on that for a while.
I mean, these stories are amazing, Buck. Thank you so much for being so candid and opening up about this. I mean, this is really what I love. This is amazing. Thank you.
Hell yeah. My pleasure. And
you mentioned it earlier, but, you know, kind of want to open that up again, is that everything you learn in all the different jobs you've had, all the hustles and those years touring with Big Thief before you were making any money. Do you feel like you know, when you're writing a solo record now, and, you know, were there any moments on Haunted Mountain, for example, where, you know, you were channeling that kind of energy, you know, you were carrying that experience with you? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, for me, so much of my songwriting is inspired by characters, or just empathy with the people I've met along the way. And so many of the most inspiring characters in my life I met working jobs, you know, like pushing myself outside of my comfort zone or my immediate community, and meeting real people out in the world. And some of the most beautiful poets I've ever met were just these construction workers, or bike messengers, or elevator people in New York City, or some of the most profound things I've ever heard in my life that I reflect on came from just blue collar workers, and like people who wake up every day and just, you know, so I try to stay in touch with that, I guess.
I can see that in London. One of my favorite things is chatting to, I'm lucky to live in an area that I've been able to stay at for 5-6 years, where you know the people working in the shops, you know the people, the cleaners, you know the people driving the trucks, and over a few years you start to get to know people on that kind of level where, small talk, but actually really use your imagination and have some fun, learn something from them, give them a bit of yourself, and you're always rewarded from that.
Yeah, I love that about people in everywhere in the world, that like creativity is so far beyond being limited to the artists, quote unquote, and the musicians, whatever. Like, I think that every last one of us like is expressing our feelings and trying to empathize with each other and reach out beyond our own little world to, you know, to give meaning to this thing. And you find that everywhere. And it's usually, it's always just right there in front of you too. You know, you don't have to go far.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
101 part-time jobs, 101 part-time jobs.
Cool podcast. I enjoyed this conversation.
Ace, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan and seen you a lot. And I remember seeing you for the first time at Coco in Camden.
Oh, nice.
Cool. And I think it must have just been after Masterpiece. And I kind of went having heard the record a few times. And it just, seeing you set up in the sort of semicircle and the energy that you felt in the room was just, it was celestial. You know, it was something so special. I'll always remember that. Thank you.
We're trying to keep listening to each other.
That's it. We'll be listening to you for sure. Sure. just to end with, I like hearing kind of stories about people's kind of missteps, especially in the place of work, just because I think it's funny, you know, all through school, you kind of taught, you know, unless you're lucky enough to have like a really great teacher that shows you the way of the world in that way that teachers can. I feel like a lot of people's experience in academia and in the workplace kind of goes into trying to become this perfect person, trying to, you know, write a CV or a resume that says, you know, I'm perfect, you know, I don't make mistakes, and I'm going to work, you know, I'm going to be the best person you've ever had. I just quite like to hear stories that kind of prove the antidote to that. You know, especially in a kind of LinkedIn world that, you know, being perfect is sort of made up to be so much of it. When I worked at the pub, I'd always smash glasses. I worked at a radio station doing the adverts and I'd get the dates wrong. And look, I'm not saying doing stuff wrong is cool or right, but it did teach me, you know, we learn the most from our mistakes. Do any kind of stories or anecdotes, moments for you come to mind saying that?
Yeah, I don't even know if I believe in mistakes in the creative process. Like, I just feel like throwing stuff at the wall is the most essential element. And I don't know, maybe it was, I don't know, my whole experience of playing music since I was a kid, like I was just trying to take every single opportunity I could get, regardless of its prestige or, and there was a lot of pushback against that, like from the community or from, I don't know if this is making sense.
Is this music and non-music?
Music
stuff?
And non-music stuff. But I think in my pursuit of music, just taking every gig I could get. If something's thrown at me, at least at first, like just trying to adapt to whatever bizarre situation I'm presented with. Like, it's hard for me to come up with one that would be defined as a misstep, because it all feels like a victory to me. Like playing, like I got to do this, I was offered to play bass in this bicycle powered music festival across Europe for 6 months with this like third wave ska band called the Ginger Ninjas from California. And that is not a gig that I would have seeked out, but it was offered to me and I took it, you know, because it sounded hilarious. And I ended up playing 6-string bass, like on the back of a bicycle, riding through, you know, Berlin with 4,000 people naked on bicycles with a pedal powered sound system, and playing like in tree sits in England with like the oldest tree sit in the in the country, I think, where these people have chained themselves to these old growth trees for, the last 30 years or something, and sleeping in graveyards outside of Marseille, and playing in a Trojan horse in Prague, and like all these places that I would have never ended up in if I had the prejudice against playing in a third wave ska band, for instance, because it's like not cool anymore or whatever. And that experience fed back into it, to I don't know, to something new. And I mean, just breakdowns, like, again, buying the best car I could afford and booking a tour, and ending up breaking down like 7 times. I've broken down so many times on the road. Not waiting to, have the money to afford a good car, and just getting out there, and the people that I've met along the way, the angels who have saved me and picked me up on the side of the road. And like one time we broke down in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. Our drive shaft just fell off, and we were picked up by these 2 like badass older ladies on Harleys with their like long hair in the wind, and they took us to the nearest town and like got a toolbox and then brought it back and fixed our car for us. And just stuff like that like, I don't know. We would have never experienced these things if we hadn't stepped into a, seemingly kind of dangerous ragtag situation,
Yeah.
Touring in an old van with no AC and no heat, and like wrapping ourselves in blankets on the way to Virginia or whatever. And I don't know.
It's people,
Just
huh? People make it.
Yeah. People, like, you find so many angels out there, people who believe in you. They see you, reaching for something, and they do whatever they can to help you out. And like, if I would have never experienced any of that if I hadn't put myself in a situation that felt like it could be a misstep. You know what I mean?
Thank you so much, Buck. This has been so much fun. Thank you for it.
No doubt. Thanks again.
So there was Buck Meek here on 101 Part-Time Jobs. I'm thrilled to have spoken with Buck. Big Thief, one of those bands that I think will be a defining flagpost in this era of music, which sounds quite grandiose to say, but there we go. 101 Part-Time Jobs. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. On Spotify, you can write a comment to say who you'd like to hear on this and who you're listening to, so do let me know. Also, get in touch on 101 Part-Time Jobs podcast at gmail.com, or on Twitter and Instagram. Let me know some of your work stories. Let me know some of the things you've heard, permissible activity. I love to hear that stuff. I'm going to start shouting out. I'm going to start telling those stories on this show. Make sure you subscribe, leave a review or a rating, and I'll see you tomorrow with an episode with Fiddler, and next week with Snail Mail. Plus, lots more to come, as always. See you then.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.